New Zealander Vincent Ward was approached to direct Alien 3 after producers Walter Hill and David Giler saw his movie The Navigator, a medieval odyssey. He initially wasn't interested, and when he read David Tui's prison script was even less interested. But after much pestering from Fox and his agent, and being told that he could rewrite the script, he agreed to a meeting in early 1990. He came up with a whole new take, which Brandywine and Fox were excited about, and he was paired with John Fasano to write the script. As discussed in the previous episode, this happened unbeknownst to Tui, who was still working on his script. When Tui got wind that he was being lied to by Fox, he quit in disgust. What is usually called the Ward script is in fact the Ward-Fasano script. Fasano claims to have written 10 drafts with Ward, but the one we're looking at is titled First Draft and dated March 29, 1990. Fasano has sole screenwriting credit, with he and Ward sharing the story credit. Before we get to the actual script, we're presented with an epigraph from Hermann Hesse's novel Narcissus and Goldmund. This is not a reference to the shuttle from Alien. This is in a similar vein to the quotes from Auden and Conrad on the original Alien script. As my knowledge of Hesse's work barely even rates as superficial, I won't attempt to analyse the quote or how it relates to the script here, other than the obvious reference to death and motherhood. We open on a pinpoint of light which resolves into a red ember, a glass furnace, a river of molten glass. The light reflects off wooden walls. Monks man the furnace and bellows and get around using ropes, pulleys and flying foxes. One older monk, Brother Kyle, sings about Brother John as the latter mixes up a salve with a mortar and pestle and uses it to treat another monk with a burn on his arm. John is described as being physically strong, but with a fear in his eyes, which is echoed by Kyle's song. John sends the burned monk away, and Kyle compliments John's work and says the abbot will be pleased. John downplays it by comparing himself to the late Father Anselm, the previous healer, and asks him not to say anything to the abbot in case the burned monk ends up with an infection. They exit the furnace for lunch, but John heads up to the library, collecting his dog Matthias on the way. Brother Philip in the library is leaving as John arrives. Philip warns him that no book leaves the library. John sneaks Matthias in and starts reading from a volume from 1348, which seems to be about a plague. The abbot enters, a man in his 70s with a wooden chain in place of a rope belt for his cassock. He good-naturedly remonstrates with John for letting Matthias in, then affords John the honour of unlocking the book he's reading so he can take it back to his room. He also compliments John on his work with the burned monk. Instead of going back to his room, John heads up to the bell tower, opening a door at the top, which opens onto the surface of a planetoid. Aseon, a man-made orbiter 5 miles across, made from lightweight steel by the company on special order, and sheathed in wood. John sits by an inland sea, under the stars, and continues reading his book about the Black Death. He spots a brighter star in the sky, and it slowly gets closer. A montage as days pass, the star gets brighter, and more monks, hundreds now, stand atop the orbiter to watch. A legend tells us where we are. The star crashes overhead, so close that John reaches for it and has his hand burned with the heat. It crashes into the sea in a plume of steam, and John rows a leather and wood coracle out to what is revealed to be Emergency Escape Vehicle number 4 from the Sulaco. He enters as Kyle and others follow. Halfway between terror and entranced by the technology of the EEV, John finds a smashed cryotube and indications that Newt has been bodily dragged away, along with a mention of Newt's doll Casey, even though this was left behind on LV-426. A screen keeps count of how long since the EEV separated, 7,921 hours, or around 11 months. He watches a video message from Ripley telling us that aliens have infested the Sulaco and she is evacuating. Hicks and Bishop are dead. John finds Ripley's cryotube as Kyle and the other monks enter, warning him to get out. John opens the tube and pulls Ripley out to his coracle and starts rowing back to shore. As the monks murmur in slightly panicked tones about a ship and a woman, Ripley stirs in John's arms and tries to say something about Newt before passing out. John tells Kyle about the wondrous lights inside the EEV, like the stars of heaven on earth. Ripley has dark dreams about an alien approaching her in bed and placing a hand on her stomach while the EEV is towed ashore. She wakes and is calmed down by John, drifting off to sleep again. The EEV is hoisted inside. Ripley eventually wakes and sees out the window a blue sky, monks picking apples and fishing, sheep grazing. She does a double take as she sees more monks on scaffolding painting the ceiling blue. the underside of Aseon's outer shell. Windows let sunlight in. She looks more closely at some monks working on cabins below. They are in fact pulling them apart and not repairing them as she thought. The wood is loaded into carts. Ripley speaks with the abbot and is told that Newt is dead. She realises that an alien has come with them and is now on the loose. She tells the abbot they left Earth on the Sulaco 6 months earlier, but the abbot says that's impossible. The brothers left Earth 70 years ago when Earth was on the brink of a new dark age. A computer virus was threatening to wipe out all recorded knowledge. Ripley tries to process this but focuses on the immediate problem, warning the population of Aseon. The abbot won't have any of it and locks her in her room, forbidding John from speaking with her. That night, a hysterical monk, Brother Graham, wakens John with news that his sheep is ill. John tends to the animal and makes mention of how cold it is, and Graham says he's ripping wood off the walls to keep the fire going in his cabin. They pile hay around the sheep to try and keep it warm, and John notices some slime before the creature starts shaking. John is thrown back and a flaming torch falls into the hay, setting it alight. The sheep explodes, spraying John and Graham with blood and gore. The quadruped chestburster emerges, covered in wool. Brother Graham attacks it with a pitchfork, lifting it out of the sheep carcass. Acid blood spills, starting fires on the floor everywhere it drops. He shoves the writhing chestburster into the rapidly spreading hay fire in the corner of the barn until it dies. John acts as if he's seen the devil. Ripley watches the fire from her window as 4 monks burst in and drag her away. She's brought before a tribunal and accused of bringing evil to Aseon. Ripley pleads to no avail and is cast down to the prison level and locked up. John tries to plead Ripley's case as well to the abbot, but he is warned off. Ripley is boarded up in a cell at the same time the EEV is walled up inside the roof of the abbey. One of the monks throws Casey's head into Ripley's cell as the last plank is nailed in. She freaks out, cursing them and smashing her head against the wall. Once she's calmer, she throws the doll's head against the wall and it lands looking back at her. She tells it not to stare and a voice says, "Sorry." An old man's face peers through a hole in the wall. John goes through various books in the library searching for references to the devil, Lucifer, the temptation of saints, a depiction of Satan with a face on his bum. He finds one particular illustration and his eyes go wide. We don't get to see it, but he yanks the book off its chain and heads to the abbot's office. As he approaches, Brother Graham is led from the room, gagged. John hides and hears the abbot telling another guard to bring John to him. John instead heads to the glass furnace to find Kyle. He frantically tries to tell him about the book, but the other monks believe he's afflicted the same as Ripley and run out. Kyle tries to calm him, but John flees to the elevator shaft to reach Ripley, only to find the rope bitten through. He finds the ladders leading to the lower levels and starts climbing down. Elsewhere, a number of monks are attacked in the communal lavatory. One of the monks from the tribunal, Matthew, has something alien stuck up his rectum before being violently dragged into the toilet. While the abbot and others wonder what is happening, blood starts pouring from a faucet and another monk shits himself, while blood and gore erupt from the other toilets, covering the walls. In her cell, Ripley speaks with the old man, Anthony, an android, in the next cell. He tries to get her to eat, but she rejects it, wallowing in a pit of despair. Anthony says she has to fight back, but she's tired of fighting. Death follows her everywhere she goes. John arrives looking for Ripley. He finds Anthony, who he'd thought dead for 15 years. Ripley realises John believes her, but tells him to leave. She's not interested in helping. She explains about the Nostromo and Newt, and says it needs to end. John pleads with her, and she relents. Ripley, John and Anthony run through the prison level talking about how the alien takes on aspects of its host, and Ripley tells them they need to get to the EEV and leave. John says he can't abandon the library, which houses some books that survived the fire of Alexandria. She asks about why there's an android on a colony of monks. Anthony explains that he's a company plant in the prison. John prefers the term colony. John details that the order was small to begin with and flew under the radar. When a computer virus threatened the world, thousands more joined. The company perceived this as a threat and constructed a narrative that they were political dissidents and sent to the orbiter as a gulag. When the supply ships stopped coming, Anthony told them he was a robot and was imprisoned. Ripley tells them that she was recently on Earth and there was no computer virus. John is dubious. John and Anthony explain the layout of Aseon. The Abbey, the fields, and the EEV is in heaven. They are currently at the bottom, in hell. There is a sea in the middle. There is 5 miles of ladders to climb to heaven. Ripley changes her mind and decides not to go, and tells them that they'll need heavy firepower to kill the alien. John says there's no technology, but Ripley wonders how the air and water is recirculated. Anthony says there's a technology room, an atmosphere processing plant, 1 level below the sea. Ripley changes her mind again and agrees to go with them. They'll take as many books as they can on the EEV. Just then she feels a twinge in her midsection, but dismisses it as the after effects of hypersleep. In the upper part of the station, monks carry fire torches and descend to an underground wheat field. They spread out through the wheat, directed by the abbot standing on the back of a wooden cart. He sees something moving towards the lead monk and shouts a warning too late. The monk is killed, dropping his torch. The alien sweeps across the front line of monks, tearing them to pieces before they realise what's hit them. Torches are dropped, setting the wheat aflame, while monks mistakenly kill each other in the smoke and panic. The terrified abbot climbs down from his wagon and the alien, camouflaged to look like the golden wheat, looms over him. The abbot screams and runs. John explains to Ripley that all the things that have happened aren't her fault, in response to her comments about the alien having a personal vendetta. Climbing a long ladder from the prison level, Anthony has a vision of John and Ripley as demons. They try to stop him falling, but he beats them with his stick before they can finally drag him up and he passes out. John and Ripley land on top of each other and an awkward, intimate moment passes. Anthony comes around and explains his vision. Ripley says that androids can't dream, but he tells them his brain is cyber-organic. While a human brain sloughs off images and sensations during sleep, Anthony does not sleep. The accumulated data manifests as visions, 20 years worth on Aseon. John says the images of demons and monsters are portents of doom. Anthony dismisses them as pictures he absorbed from old books in the library. He drew them on the walls of his prison cell in an effort to rid himself of them. Another intimate moment passes between Ripley and John as he examines her ribs from when they fell on top of each other. Ripley realises that it was John who pulled her out of the EEV, burning his hands in the process. After a brief respite, the three move on, climbing a ladder that seems to be a mile high, to another corridor. Seawater mixed with blood drips through the ceiling. John senses something in the darkness in front of them, and they find the abbot, cowering in fear. Ripley scoffs at him from hiding something that he said didn't exist. The abbot tries to reassert his authority, accusing John and Anthony of consorting with the devil to fight the devil. Ripley shoots back that it's funny to be accused of heresy on a planet full of heretics. The abbot confesses that it was all about control and keeping the Brotherhood together. Ripley threatened the status quo. The four make their way to the technology room along unstable corridors, warped by seawater and riddled with man-traps. John rips some wood off the wall and uses it to trip the traps. Anthony lags behind, sensing a presence. He glimpses something in the darkness to the rear and hears the snap of a trap. The other three arrive at the door to the tech room and try to find a way in. Ripley leans against the wall, exhausted and sick to her stomach. John finds a panel and slides it aside to reveal a keyboard. The abbot orders Ripley to open it, while behind them Anthony hears another trap set off. The alien has blended into the wooden walls and starts to reveal itself. Anthony backs away and steps in one of the man traps and falls. The others hear him scream as the alien approaches, his visions made real. It picks him up, tearing Anthony's ankle, and spits acid in his eyes. John hits the alien with Anthony's stick to no avail, as Ripley gives up entering codes and tries to hotwire the door. The alien picks up John, holding him upside down. The monk grabs a trap and slams it into the alien's face, snapping shut on its inner jaw. John escapes with Anthony as the acid lights fires on the wooden floor. Ripley opens the door and the four just make it inside ahead of the alien, the acid having destroyed the trap in its face. Ripley turns around hoping to find technology and weapons, only to find wood and cloth windmills, slowly turning, circulating the air. She collapses and passes out. She dreams she's on the EEV, gripping a flamethrower as Newt sleeps. She searches for the alien, noticing too late the tail coming up between her legs. It throws her over a cryotube as if to rape her from behind, and instead of Newt, Ripley sees a doll's head in a pool of blood. The alien's lips pull back for a kiss. She screams and wakes up. They talk about the windmills recirculating the air and water, creating tides on the sea, and how the fires they burn create soot on the windows of the orbiter, making Aseon yet colder. The abbot and Anthony explain that the planetoid is a triumph of built-in obsolescence. The company sentenced them to die slowly. Ripley moves off, saying they should just wait for the air to run out, and John goes to follow when the abbot blocks his way. He starts babbling about Ripley being a prisoner of her own mind, then talks faster, as if speaking in tongues. He shakes. Blood trickles from his ear as he keeps talking faster when his head explodes, spraying John in blood and brain. The headburster grips the abbot's spinal column and the body staggers around with a new head. Ripley uses Anthony's staff to smack the alien, sending it flying into a corner where it disappears. The three discuss alien biology and inconsistencies with what Ripley has seen previously. It gradually dawns on Ripley that the cause of her chest pain and her alien dreams are because she is carrying an embryo, but she says nothing. She tells John that if the alien is taunting her, maybe they can use that to fight it. They find a ladder up to the underground sea, leaving the blind and crippled Anthony behind. Before they go, he tells Ripley that he knows and wishes her luck. Ripley and John start to cross the sea in a coracle. Below, a shadow falls across Anthony. On the sea, John tells Ripley that he was 5 when he left Earth with his father. It took 30 years in hypersleep to get here, then another 40 after they arrived. Ripley tells John that she had a daughter called Kathy on Earth. She left on the Nostromo when she was 9, and when Ripley returned, she was a bitter 70-year-old woman. She says she went back to LV-426 not to fight, but to let the alien kill her. She's not looking for absolution. But even if she couldn't be a mother to her daughter or to Newt, she can make sure John survives. Just then it starts to rain blood from the upper levels. The alien swims under the coracle unseen. Down in the technology room, the windmills are on fire, and of Anthony there is no sign. They reach the other shore and climb up to the now incinerated wheat field. The corpses of dead monks lie everywhere. They climb again to the monastery level, finding fires, smoke, and more dead monks. Alien hive webbing covering the bodies. They make their way to the glassworks and find more fires burning. Brother Kyle sits quietly playing solitaire, muttering to himself. John and Ripley know what's coming, and John strangles his friend. They each find glass-blowing tools to use as weapons and head to the library. Matthias jumps out, scaring them as they gather books. Matthias growls and they find the alien at the doorway. It's lost a foot, and its tongue hangs uselessly as it pops the head off Anthony's body and throws it at their feet. It partly looks like wood and partly like wheat. Its camouflage abilities also affected. The dog runs at the alien and it tries to stab him with its tail. Ripley and John attack with their tools. Ripley stabs it and acid blood spurts from the open tube she was using, landing on her cassock. She rips it off as the alien spins around, acid blood starting fires in the books. The floor collapses and they land in the glassworks below. The alien falls into the molten vat while John dangles from the flying fox rope. Ripley hangs from the library floor above. With the library an inferno, she can only drop to the floor of the glassworks. John climbs to the ledge overlooking the furnace as the molten glass alien bursts from the vat. It goes after Ripley as John zips across on the flying fox, distracting it. He yells to Ripley to pull a lever, which tips open a huge dump tank of water on the alien, causing it to explode. Beaten and bloodied, they head back up to Matthias in the library, but it's futile to save any of the books. They finally reach the roof in the EEV. Ripley tells John the EEV's databanks are filled with knowledge. She sends John to another compartment to grab a spare part and then locks him in, explaining that she's not coming. She has an alien inside her. John pleads that he can save her. He's read it in a book he's been carrying, but she says if she can save him, it will make up for all those she's lost. He continues to plead that he couldn't save Father Anselm, and if he can't try and save Ripley, his body may live, but his soul will be dead. She relents and John prepares some water and herbs which Ripley drinks. She lies down and he straddles her, praying, then starts punching her in the diaphragm repeatedly. She vomits thick mucus as the embryo is forced up her throat, then gets stuck. She starts to choke. John crosses himself and starts to perform CPR. The alien slithers out of Ripley's mouth and into John's. He collapses against a console and Ripley asks why. He says it was the only way. The ancients who wrote in the book knew. He gets to his feet and walks out of the EEV and back into the burning abbey to join his brothers. The floor under the EEV starts to give way and Ripley launches, blasting through the outer shell, leaving Aseon behind. She puts Matthias into a hypersleep tube and reads a note that John left, hoping that Ripley has found some peace. Ripley says that she has, as Aseon fades into darkness, a dying ember, bookending with the start of the film. So, it's easy to see why David Giler and Walter Hill were drawn to Vincent Ward's vision. It was like nothing else that was going on in Hollywood science fiction at the time, and was a fresh take on Alien that didn't rehash the first two films. The religious angle was something that the franchise hadn't touched on at that point, and was ripe for metaphors about fallen angels, devils, demons, and Ripley rising from a pit of despair, or hell, in an attempt to reach heaven, but instead finding Inferno. It's also easy to see why Ward received a story credit for the final film. A good deal of elements from this early draft made it to the film, such as crash landing in an EEV in water with everyone else dead, monks or religious prisoners, a jump scare with an oxygen mask, monks wearing goggles and salvaging the EEV in a storm, a monk mentioning that it's been a long time since he's seen a woman, the EEV being hoisted inside, Andrews being very similar to the abbot, Ripley's presence in an all-male environment being a source of conflict, similarities between the wheat field scene and the quinitracetylene fire scene resulting in numerous deaths, similarities between the man-traps being set off in the dark and candles being blown out, an alien racing towards a slamming door, the furnace at the end and water being used to kill it, and having to deal with the embryo after the main creature is destroyed. Probably the major difference is that the Ward Fasano script ends up being a kind of quest or road movie once Ripley leaves her cell, while the final film more or less stays in the one spot. The problems, however, are also immediately evident. The first and main problem being Aseon itself. How and why does it exist? Alien isn't hard science fiction. The aliens themselves defy science, plus there's sound in space, artificial gravity, faster than light travel, etc. But it does adhere to things like explosive decompression. In fact, that's a pretty important one. Aseon having any sort of atmosphere is hard to explain. The second anyone opens a hatch to the beach at the top of the station, they're going to get blown out. Attempts are made to explain how the internal atmosphere works in the technology room, and how it will ultimately kill the inhabitants. How does old wood remain airtight though? And more than that, why would the company expend time and resources constructing a 5-mile space station out of wood, then towing it out into deep space? It would be simpler to just load all the heretics into a ship, fly them away, then open an airlock and claim it was an accident. It's not like anyone's going to miss them, and the first two films firmly establish Weyland-Yutani favours the bottom line above all else. Spending God knows how much on a wooden planet so the inhabitants can spend decades dying out is very difficult to reconcile. The other main problem is Ripley herself. This is labelled a first draft, so her character may have improved over the next several drafts, but while Ward and Fasano have given her a very definitive personality here, of someone who has reached the end of the line, she is incredibly indecisive. The Ripley of the first two films makes a call, then goes with it, adapting as circumstances change. In this script, she does a series of 180s. First when John asks her for help, then when they tell her there's miles of ladders to climb. She gives up again in the technology room before changing her mind. Again, this could be put down to a particularly low mood early on, but she doesn't develop out of this mindset, doing yet another U-turn in the last few pages when she tries to launch John on his own in the EEV. It's not really true to her character, and compared to the final film, she only really does this once when she asks Dylan to kill her and he convinces her of a better way. Ward describes another ending where John walks into a flaming wheat field to die, which Weaver objected to, preferring Ripley to die, and the ending was duly rewritten. Differences in other drafts include Newt being found dead with a hole in her chest, and Bishop being present and the monks giving him wooden legs. Artwork on vincentwardfilms.com also indicates there may have been a sequence where the monks, searching for answers in a vertical library, are attacked by the alien. The alien life cycle is a little confused, and how the abbot or Kyle or Sandy the sheep were impregnated is glossed over. The abbot's headburster never has any payoff either. However, the idea of camouflage was potentially brilliant, as well as giving the alien more personality, playing into Ripley's paranoia about it having a personal vendetta. Curiously, Ripley consistently refers to the alien as him. Anthony offered a different take on androids, which isn't unwelcome, although again a little confused from a technical standpoint. Another problem is that while some sequences would have undoubtedly been great, the wheat field, Anthony's vision, the man-trap sequence, the headburster, and the showdown in the glassworks, there's a lot of scenes where people just stand around and talk or argue, and it tends to get bogged down. Often the substance of the scenes isn't uninteresting, but presented in a way that's just slow. and the running gag of Ripley referring to John as father and him correcting her never really lands. The first few pages establish a friendship between John and Kyle, which never really gets a chance to properly play out. Costume designer Bob Ringwood refers to homoerotic undertones, and it's possible this relationship is what he was referring to, so maybe it developed more in other drafts. But it was mainly the wooden planet that was the sticking point with the producers and some members of the crew, and suggestions were made to change it to a mining colony. Fasano left the project to work on another 48 hours, and Greg Proost was brought in to write 5 more drafts with Ward. This didn't prove fruitful, and Fasano was planned to return when Larry Ferguson was brought in instead and flown to London to work on the script. Ferguson had previously warned Fasano that Alien 3 was going to be a crappy job and not to do it. Increasingly frustrated that his vision was being diluted, as well as finding out that his line producer was reporting his movements back to Fox every night, Ward was delivered an ultimatum to make more changes or be fired. He opted for the latter. Ironically, Ferguson, who had warned Fasano off the job, was the first to work with Fincher and ultimately received a screenwriting credit, despite, according to Fasano, not even completing a draft. Fasano was still working on the project when he learned that he'd been replaced and fell out with producer Walter Hill, whom he described as a mentor, and they had a bad relationship for years after. Fasano himself went on to work consistently, often uncredited, on films such as the aforementioned Another 48 Hours, Tombstone, Die Hard with a Vengeance, Judge Dredd, Universal Soldier the Return, Darkness Falls, and even an unused draft of Alien vs. Predator that resulted in a lawsuit. He passed away from heart failure in 2014. Vincent Ward went on to make Map of the Human Heart, What Dreams May Come, and River Queen, amongst others. The script would ultimately be written and rewritten leading up to and throughout the shoot by Giler and Hill, and they already had at least one draft completed by October 10, 1990. Rex Pickett was brought in for a short time by Fox over December and January 1990-91 to give the script a polish before Giler and Hill took it back. Pickett gives his unique perspective on his time with the production in an interview with AvP Galaxy, which is linked below. By January 14, 1991, Fox had Alien 3 in front of cameras, but despite having 10 writers at that point, didn't have a locked script. None of the drafts written by Giler and Hill credited Ward or Fasano, though the work print cut of the film originally credited Ward, Giler and Hill as story writers. Before the film was released, however, Ward was given sole story credit, while Giler, Hill and Ferguson received screenplay credits. Fasano didn't receive any credit, but left this little nugget at the bottom of the screenplay.